Now, last week, I reviewed what many consider to be the pinnacle of shitty superhero games, Superman on the Nintendo 64. Its awkward flight and combat controls, dated and dull polygonal graphics, shallow story, and of course, endless rings that dastardly Lex Luthor has you flying through within his virtual reality metropolis has made it a popular punching bag of internet gamers and critics since time immemorial. It goes without saying that Superman on the N64 was a massive disappointment, but one must keep in mind that this was all due to its ill-fated development behind the scenes, which I would suggest watching my previous review for more info on. Despite Superman 64 shitting the bed in grandiose fashion when it was released in 1999, the Man of Steel would get another game based off his appearance in the Superman animated series, called Superman Shadow of Apokolips, which hit store shelves a mere 3 years later, in 2002. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of you out there have never even heard of this game before. I never knew it existed until only a few years ago, when I made the conscious decision to review the title at some point down the road. Following the disaster that was Superman 64, I think Shadow of Apokolips flew under a lot of people's radar. Get it? Flew? Anyways, I would assume the excitement level for a game like this was pretty much non-existent at that time. Despite being on more advanced hardware with superior graphics, Shadow of Apokolips on the surface looked like it could just end up being the exact same game in the end, with a new coat of paint, like pouring Crystal Light into a bucket of piss. Gamers probably didn't want to take their chances with it and passed on buying it. Thankfully, I come to you today with relatively good news. Superman Shadow of Apokolips is not a complete dumpster fire like its predecessor. In many ways, it's everything Superman on the N64 originally aimed to be, and then some. You actually feel like the Man of Steel playing it, flying through a 3D metropolis, using a lot of his iconic powers and abilities, and taking on a series of noteworthy villains. Shadow of Apokolips features a much stronger narrative than the one found in Superman on N64, or lack thereof. It's not flawless by any stretch of the imagination. It does feel somewhat uneventful at times, even a bit monotonous with some of the stuff the game actually gets you to do on the gameplay side of things, which I will get to in a minute, but it's still a heck of a lot better than what we were used to in Superman games, especially at the time. Following a nasty battle with Superman in the streets of Metropolis, John Corbin, Metallo, is taken to Stryker's Island prison, where Star Lab scientists manage to remove his head, putting him out of commission for the time being. Superman is notified by the police that the criminal organization known as the Intergang have seemingly returned to the city. The Man of Steel quickly determines that this Intergang is simply a group of robots using many of the gang's old methods. He labels them Interbots, and they have been enhanced, given special weapons powered by some sort of fusion energy that can harm Superman. Lex Luthor is revealed to be the mastermind behind these Interbots and sends them to track down and capture all of the scientists in Metropolis, including Superman's close friend, Professor Hamilton. He forces these scientists to work with his own at LexCorp to recreate as many of these highly advanced fusion weapons as possible. Now, this technology had come from a mysterious benefactor, the ruler of Apokolips himself, Darkseid. He has employed the aid of Lex Luthor on Earth to help him destroy the last son of Krypton, so he can then conquer the planet unopposed. Darkseid pops in throughout the story numerous times, and he makes sure that Luthor is being continuously monitored in case he gets any wise ideas and fails to realize his true place beneath Darkseid's boot. Anywho, the Interbots eventually release Metallo from Stryker's prison, and his head is reattached to his body. It's at this point several other Superman villains are also released by Lex Luthor, such as Livewire and the Parasite, in the hopes of killing Big Blue. Luthor manages to manipulate Metallo into going after Superman, posing as some sort of mysterious disembodied alien head thing, though Corbin would instead go to LexCorp so he could first kill Luthor out of revenge for turning him into a cyborg. Superman intervenes and battles Corbin within Luthor's office, and man, do you fuck that place up, depending on how much damage you deal to it. The fight then reaches a weapons factory, where you throw Metallo into pressing machines that do increased damage. Like something out of the Terminator movies, Metallo's artificial skin is melted off his body when molten steel is dropped on him. You then knock him into some kind of magnetized claw thing, which rips his head off once again, in pretty gruesome fashion. The story of this game is fairly intriguing, featuring a lot of the main beats you'd find in an episode of Superman the Animated Series. Despite the game's title being Shadow of Apokolips, don't expect any kind of epic boss fight against the big man himself though, Darkseid. He plays the role of a side character in this game, watching in the wings as everything else unfolds. He's featured only in the cutscenes, so don't get too excited. You get a sense that Shadow of Apokolips was building into something greater, and that Darkseid would have been heavily featured in a sequel. Unfortunately, it never saw the light of day, and, as a result, the ending of this game leaves you feeling a bit unsatisfied. Having Metallo be the final boss was awesome, don't get me wrong. I love that character and his interpretation in Superman the Animated Series, but it would have been even better if you had gotten a memorable battle with Darkseid as well, especially coming off that laughable encounter with him from the N64 game. Some Superman fans claim Shadow of Apokolips is the best video game ever released based on the Man of Steel, and I mean from a purely visual standpoint, they're not wrong. This game is very faithful to its source material. It looks just like the animated series did, and its stylized, cel-shaded graphics have a certain appeal to them. I wish more games were made using them. They look awesome. When enemies are firing their weapons at you, sometimes you will see the bullets bouncing off of Superman's body, if you look closely enough, and it only works in the darker levels obviously. The flashing effects and coloring remind me of those old Fleischer cartoons from the 1940s. Many of the voice actors from the series also reprise their iconic roles. Tim Daly plays Superman, Dana Delaney is Lois Lane, Clancy Brown voices Lex Luthor, Malcolm McDowell is Metallo, and Lori Petty portrays Livewire. The only major voice actor absent here is Michael Ironside, with his badass depiction of Darkseid from the DC animated universe. Kevin Michael Richardson voices the character in his place, which I mean ain't a bad choice, but he just can't fill Ironside's jackboots. Let's be real.
Yes, and I shall be watching both of you closely. Very closely indeed, Superman.
I think anyone who has played Shadow of Apokolips before would agree with me when I say that its controls and overall mechanics are a vast improvement over those found in Superman 64. However, it still has quite a lot of issues with it that made my playthrough very frustrating. Superman Shadow of Apokolips may be a fun game to play in spurts, but it's not all that fun to complete. The controls, while vastly superior to the N64 title, are still incredibly clunky, and, depending on how you look at them, they can be both overcomplicated and oversimplified, if that makes any sense. Shadow of Apokolips is not an open-world game, so don't get your hopes up. It consists of several levels, with some just being larger than others. When your play area is expanded though, in these bigger levels, you do have the freedom to fly around a little bit. Flying is initiated by pressing the right analog stick up, which makes you hover. You then have to hold the R2 button to fly forward, and pressing X along with R2 performs a boost. When you want to return to the ground, you need to press and hold the right analog stick down, which can be really awkward, especially during some of the levels that have time limits. Superman tends to go in directions you don't want him to, or stay in the air when all you really want him to do is land. Countless times when I was playing this game, I found myself fighting with the flight controls just as much as I was fighting with the enemies. The controls are not as responsive and intuitive as I think they should be. What would a Superman game be without combat? In Shadow of Apokolips, the Man of Tomorrow can dish out justice by tapping the X button. The punch animations are a much-needed upgrade from the bizarre and goofy ones found in Superman 64. By holding X, you can pick up enemies when they are stunned, even items in the environment to use as weapons, such as nearby piping that Superman rips from the wall. Double tapping X also allows you to throw whatever you are holding, turning it into a devastating projectile. Superman has a few special combat moves that he can perform by pressing square and X at the same time. One is a fast spinning attack, and another is a ground slam, which is done while hovering. Both of these are great for crowd control when you are being swarmed by Interbots. Unlike Superman on the N64, Shadow of Apokolips doesn't force you to find specific pickups in order to use Superman's iconic powers. Now you can perform his super breath and heat vision with a simple press of a button, as long as you have energy remaining in your power meter, which, don't worry, fills up by itself over time, how it should be. Something else that replenishes itself over time is Superman's health meter, a fun and reasonable way to adapt a character like this into a video game, one that is more or less a walking solar battery. It makes sense. Honestly, Super Breath is only used a few times throughout the game. The power you will be utilizing the most is your heat vision. Holding triangle activates it, but double tapping triangle releases a blast of heat energy, almost like a missile. It is essential that you spam this attack at certain points in order to do massive amounts of damage to stronger enemy types, like the jetpack Interbots, tanks, and of course, bosses. I mentioned already that you will sometimes find yourself fighting with the game's controls, and the worst levels of Shadow of Apokolips really exacerbate this issue. Some of the levels that have Superman in smaller and constricting areas can become awkward due to the fact that you are unable to move the camera freely. The stealth mission where you play as Clark Kent infiltrating LexCorp is downright atrocious. Staying out of sight from the scientists and avoiding the mines that are floating around can be a real challenge when you can't move the camera freely to effectively see your surroundings. It comes down to trial and error, with you being forced to memorize the level's layout, which is just no fun. Each time you fail, you are forced to sit through a fairly long loading screen as well, which is irksome. All of the levels in this game that involve time limits can also go fuck themselves. You are given barely enough time to complete your objectives. Much like the stealth mission, it's trial and error. You have to do them until you have found the most efficient route possible, without making any mistakes, which feels incredibly unforgiving seeing as children would have been playing this game. The most brutal of them all was the one that had you carry 4 coolant containers to a nuclear reactor inside of a volcano. You have to pick each one up at the end of 4 separate tunnels filled with obstacles. Racing back to the reactor, you'll have to dodge falling boulders, spewing lava and fire. If the boulders hit you, Superman will just drop the coolant, the best case scenario. You can still salvage your run if this happens, as long as you don't take too long trying to pick it back up again with these cumbersome controls. Easier said than done. However, if the lava comes in contact with the coolant at any point, the container is just destroyed, and you have to go all the way back to the end of the tunnel to get another one again. It's basically an instant fail, because you'll lose too much time backtracking. This section gives you barely enough time to get all 4 coolant containers before the reactor ruptures. You basically can't fuck up, not even once. I did enjoy my time with Superman Shadow of Apokolips. It was a strong improvement over the N64 Superman game, but it still leaves a lot to be desired. The controls and camera are really wonky at times, the collision detection is pretty inconsistent, and while the story can be somewhat engaging, the actual objectives you are doing in each of the levels can become very repetitive. You battle the same enemies over and over again. You are sent to destroy this or carry that, protect a certain number of civilians. All of it can get really dull and falls kind of flat by the end. I would still consider this game as being the best Superman has ever had though. I know a lot of you out there might be angry at that opinion, feeling other titles such as The Death and Return of Superman, Superman Returns, or hell, even the Injustice games deserve to be higher on that list. But I just feel, despite all of its flaws, it just gets the Superman character a lot better than all of those other games do. And I mean, it's an adaptation of the Superman animated series from the late 1990s, the one I grew up with, and what I consider to be the greatest version of Superman outside of the comics, so maybe I'm just a little biased. It is a shame that Shadow of Apokolips never got a sequel though. With some more polish and content, it could have been something special. Imagine taking the fight to Darkseid on Apokolips, having the story be set in outer space, or at the very least, have several levels set in outer space. You could have not only battled earthly enemies, but also stronger creatures like the parademons. You might have even been able to squeeze Lobo into the story somehow, have him go after Superman. That would have been really cool. I had a lot of frustration in areas playing Shadow of Apokolips, but I do think its positives outweigh the negatives. It's a lesser-known title in Superman's video game library that deserves a lot more love and attention than it currently gets. Because of the immense failure of Superman 64, Shadow of Apokolips became buried in obscurity, but it is a decent superhero game, far from amazing, but still worth some of your time nonetheless. I want to thank everyone for watching this review, and if you've played it before, I would love to hear your thoughts on this game down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video and have not done so already, please subscribe to my channel and hit that bell icon so you can be notified whenever I release new content. Thanks once again for tuning in. Stay nerdy, take care, and see you next time.